welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is a reading roundup. In this video I'm going to share with you the books that I have read recently, and two of them are advanced reader copies that I've read for NetGalley, and so I'm going to start with those. The first that I read was called The Age of Plunder by W.G. Hoskins, and I'll put the picture up here. The England of Henry VIII, 1500 to 1547. This is a reissue that was originally published in 1976, and it's put out by Sapphire books. And this was actually published in April 26th, so I was a little bit behind with this one. But this is a history book that focuses on the social and economic history of Henry's reign. So the ordinary men and women and what life was like for them. This was a well-researched academic book. It is definitely a scholarly work, and I think it's important to know that heading into it. We're in a day and age where there is a lot of narrative nonfiction being written, and this is not narrative nonfiction. It is heavy on the statistics and the charts, and it is a very scholarly work. It is very academic, and it was good. It was well written and very well researched, but I think you need to know that going into it because it's pretty heavy. And I would say that it is a great reference if you are looking for information about the time period or you are studying certain elements. It is a great reference book. And I believe I gave it 3 stars. The other NetGalley book that I read is a new release from Sarah Stewart Taylor called The Mountains Wild. And this came out at the end of June 23rd. And I was so excited to see this book because I have read a short mystery series that she has written. There's 4 books in the series, and I loved them. I thought they were so good, but that was all that she wrote. And so when I saw that she had a new book coming out, I was super excited. And so the other series, and I don't have the first book in the series yet. It's on its way though. I've just bought it from Better World Books, and I'm so excited because then I'll have all 4 of the books in the series. The series is about Sweeney St. George, who is an art professor with a specialty in cemetery statuary and mourning jewelry. So fascinating. And so the first book in the series that I don't have yet is called Oh Artful Death, and then Mansions of the Dead, Judgment of the Grave, and Still as Death. And Still as Death is the last one in the series, and it came out in 2006. So you can understand then why I was so excited to see a new book by this author. So The Mountains Wild is a story about Maggie Darcy. She is a homicide detective on Long Island, and 23 years ago her cousin Erin went missing while staying in Ireland. She was in Dublin. And at the beginning of the book, Maggie gets a call from a detective in Ireland. They have found Erin's scarf, and another woman has gone missing in similar circumstances to when Erin went missing 23 years before. And so Maggie Darcy flies to Ireland to help with the investigation and to find out what's going on. I really enjoyed this story. There was dual timelines, so we had the modern day, which was 2016, the story of Maggie in Ireland helping with the investigation, and then we also had the timeline from 1993 the year that Aaron goes missing, and at that time Maggie also goes over to Ireland to see if she can help. I really liked this. I gave it 4 stars. I would highly recommend it, and I would highly recommend the Sweeney St. George series too, if you can get your hands on it. Just really good mysteries. Okay, and then I read A Single Thread by Tracy Chevalier. This is from 2019. Yes, 2019. This is historical fiction in England in 1932. Our main character is Violet Speedwell, and she moves from Southampton to Winchester, and she becomes involved with a group of women who volunteer to do embroidery and stitch work on items for the cathedral. And so it was pretty good. I gave it 3 stars because, to be perfectly honest, parts, like, it was kind of boring. And so I feel bad saying that, but the parts about the cathedral were interesting, and there was a good section where they talk about bell ringing, and I personally find bell ringing fascinating, and I wish there was more about that. But in the end, I don't know, the character of Violet Speedwell was a bit, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it was fine. I gave it 3 stars, which means I liked it. I didn't love it, but I liked it. And so if you enjoy historical fiction, it's set in the early 30s, which is interesting. So yeah, you might want to give it a try. A Single Thread by Tracy Chevalier. And then I read To Have and to Hoax by Martha Waters. This is an unusual book for me to read, I will confess. But what caught my attention here was that it's a Regency romance, and I kind of have a bit of a soft spot for Regency romance, but I like Georgette Heyer style Regency romances. And so this one I gave 3 stars to because it was pretty good, but it did have a couple scenes of sexy times that I can't be bothered with. I don't want to read about that. And so, but what intrigued me about this was that it was a romance set during the Regency, but it was about a married couple and some and what happens with them, and that's what intrigued me. So 5 years before the events of this book, the two got married. They fell in love and they got married. And then 4 years ago, they had a fight that they have not forgiven each other for. And so their marriage is barely hanging on. And then Violet receives a letter that James has had an injury. He was thrown from his horse. And so she goes racing off to their country house because she's really worried about him, only to discover he's alive and well and doesn't appear to have any injuries at all. And so she's furious, and so she wants to teach him a lesson. So she feigns an illness of her own, and so then it becomes this game of like one-upmanship between the two of them. And as it says on the back, it features actors masquerading as doctors, threats of Swiss sanitariums, faux mistresses, and so that part intrigued me, and it was enjoyable, but it was a little more romancy than I normally like. All right, and then I am totally behind with the Lord of the Read Along, but I am plugging along, and I finally finished The Two Towers. This is the second in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. This came out in 1954. And, yeah, I just really liked it. I need to talk about this edition though, and I'm gonna get spoilery, not because I'm getting spoilery, but because this edition gets super spoilery on the back. So I'm going to put spoiler across the bottom just in case you haven't read this book yet or seen the movies or whatever. But this edition is it's an Unwin paperback edition from 1966. So it was first published in 1954. The second edition in this edition was from 1966. So it is not super long after the book originally came out, which means there would still be lots of people who didn't know the story. And yet, on the back, it says, The Two Towers, the second book in J.R.R. Tolkien's trilogy, The Lord of the Rings, recounts the further adventures of the companions after the breaking of the Fellowship of the Ring, the resurrection of Gandalf the White, the rescue of King Theoden, the besieging of the Tower of Orthanc, the betrayal of Frodo and Sam, and the capture of Frodo by the orcs. Like, it just gives everything away on the back cover. What? So I knew the story already, so I was fine with that, but I don't know who thought this was a good marketing idea for this story. But anyways, there were a few things that I really enjoyed in The Two Towers. One is in book 3, I really liked the confrontation with Saruman at his tower, his Orthanc, I think it's called. But the whole confrontation was so good between him and Gandalf. So Saruman, well, it said now with gentle question, why must you disturb my rest? Will you give me no peace at all by night or day? Its tone was that of a kindly heart aggrieved by injuries undeserved. They looked up, astonished, for they had heard no sound of his coming, and they saw a figure standing at the rail, looking down upon them, an old man swathed in a great cloak, the color of which was not easy to tell, for it changed if they moved their eyes or if he stirred. His face was long with a high forehead. He had deep, darkling eyes, hard to fathom, though the look that they now bore was grave and benevolent and a little weary. His hair and beard were white, but strands of black still showed about his lips and ears. Like, and yet unlike, muttered Gimli. So I really enjoyed that whole section, that whole confrontation was really good. I also really liked how Tolkien structured this book. So he split the story in half, essentially, in this book, telling in the first half, book 3, what happens to Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Merry, and Pippin. And then book 4, the last half, he tells what happens to Frodo and Sam. And I've heard from some other people that they did not like that at all, that they wish that it was more interspersed like they do it in the film. However, I actually really liked that structure, and the reason that I did was because that it really highlighted how truly separate the characters were from each other. So this fellowship from the first volume has broken, and they don't know what is happening to each other. So Frodo and Sam have no idea what is happening to the rest of the Fellowship, and the rest of the Fellowship have no idea what's happening to Frodo and Sam. And by separating the stories like that, it really highlights that separation. I also really liked the character of Faramir. And I've just started now reading The Return of the King, and I'm hopeful to see much more of his character in that book. I really, really liked his character. And then I just wanted to read a couple of quotes here that I thought were so good. A vast winged shape passed over the moon like a black cloud. It wheeled and went north, flying at a speed greater than any wind of Middle Earth. The stars fainted before it. It was gone. And so that was a description of the Nazgul. And I love that sentence, the stars fainted before it. So good. And then one final quote, and this is a description of Shelob. But still she was there, who was there before Sauron and before the first stone of Barad-dûr, and she served none but herself, drinking the blood of elves and men, bloated and grown fat with endless brooding on her feasts, weaving webs of shadow, for all living things were her food, and her vomit darkness. So, yay for the Lord of the Rings, I love it. And then I read the Singapore Sapphire by A.M. Stewart. This is a historical mystery set in Singapore in 1910. And I really enjoyed this story. This was great. So the main character in this is Harriet Gordon. She is a widow who is living in Singapore now with her brother, who runs a school, and she helps him out at the school, but in order to make a little more money, she has taken some work as a typist, and she's gotten work with Sir Oswald Newbold, who is an explorer, a mine magnate, and the president of the Exclusive Explorers and Geographers Club. And she goes to his house to pick up her typewriter, only to discover him dead. The detective in this book is Inspector Robert Curran, and this was a great story. I really enjoyed this mystery. It was very interesting, and I gave it 4 stars. And then I read, there was one quote from here that I wanted to read to you because it was hilarious. It's the first time Inspector Curran meets Mrs. Gordon, so they've arrived at the house after she's called for the police because she's found this dead body. Mrs. Gordon subsided onto a chair, running a hand over her eyes. He, Inspector Curran, studied her anxiously for signs of imminent vapors, but whatever momentary weakness had afflicted her had passed, and she met his gaze with surprisingly cold, hard eyes. I loved that phrase, imminent vapors, and for a couple of days here around the house, Erin and I were constantly saying that to each other, that we were watching for imminent vapors. Hilarious. All right, and then I read A Brief History of Tea by Roy Moxham, the extraordinary story of the world's favorite drink. This is a history from 2003, and I gave this 4 stars. It was really interesting. It was bookended by the author's own experiences managing a tea plantation in Africa in the early 60s. So that definitely informed how he wrote this book and his understanding of tea, the production of tea, and the consumption of tea. And so there was a couple of quotes in here too that I wanted to share with you. The company, and this would be the East India Company, sold its tea at auction by the candle. A candle was lit and bids taken until an inch of it had burnt away. So I just thought that was super interesting that they would take bids until an inch of the candle had burned away. I just thought that was really interesting. And this was, of course, in the 1600s. And this is a broadside of about 1660 called An Exact Description of the Growth, Quality, and Virtues of the Leaf Tea, where Thomas Garraway extols the benefits of tea at extraordinary length. These are some of the things that he says that the benefits of tea. It maketh the body active and lusty. It helpeth the headache, giddiness, and heaviness thereof. It removeth the obstructions of the spleen. It is very good against the stone and gravel, cleansing the kidneys and uretits, being drank with virgin's honey instead of sugar. It taketh away the difficulty of breathing, opening obstructions. It is good against lipitude distillations and cleareth the sight. There are so many here. There are like 7 or 8 more. Hilarious. And then this is from Observations on the Effects of Tea in the Gentleman's Magazine of 1737. Tea is utterly improper for food, hitherto useless in physic, and therefore to be arranged among the poisonous vegetables. And then he's talking about the British in India. He was establishing tea seed nurseries in Assam. Bruce and his men also fought to find patches of indigenous tea in the jungle. This was not an easy job. The wars fought across Assam had caused the richly cultivated valley to revert to nature. 6/8 or 7/8 of its extent covered with a jungle of gigantic reeds traversed only by the wild elephant or the buffalo, where human footstep is unknown. The Assam forests received between 100 inches and 200 inches of rain a year. London, considered wet by many, receives about 25 inches, making for numerous streams and swamps. Trees grew tall and close, often with heavy undergrowth. On foot, it was difficult to see any distance. In addition, the jungle was full of dangerous animals, especially tigers. In those days, in India, tigers were killing as many as 2,000 people a year. For these conditions, the ideal vehicle was an elephant, slow but safe and giving an excellent view over the terrain. Bruce bought 4 elephants at 15 pounds apiece. In Assam conditions, an elephant needed very little food, if any, but Bruce indulged his animals with a yearly allowance of 5 pounds for rice. So yeah, if you're interested in the history of tea at all, I can really recommend. This was really interesting. A Brief History of Tea by Roy Moxham. And then finally, The Traitor by V.S. Alexander. This is a historical fiction set during World War II, and what attracted me to this one, because let's be honest, there are a ton of World War II historical fiction out there right now. But what attracted me to this story in particular was that it was set in Germany. It was set in Munich, and it was about German students who were in the resistance. And I thought that was really a really interesting story to tell. This came out this year, 2020, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. I really liked the story. However, there were times when I found the writing a bit clunky, and it kind of took me out of the story and lessened my enjoyment a bit. But this is a story about, inspired by true events. There really was a resistance group called the White Rose in Munich, and so there is a lot of historical accuracy to that, although his main character is a fictional character. So it starts in the summer of 1942, and his main character is Natalia Petrovich, and her family are Russian, and they have come to Munich. They've been there for a number of years, but they are originally Russian. And the White Rose is a group that are distributing leaflets that are trying to warn people about the Nazis and the truth of what is going on. And so yeah, it was really interesting, but like I said, there were times when I found the writing was kind of clunky. But yeah, if you're interested in this story at all of the White Rose, this might be the book for you. So that is what I've been reading recently. Have you read any of these books? I would love to chat about them in the comment section down below, and I will see you for another video soon. Bye.